morning everyone. It's lovely to be back with you again, and I'm here to tell you another story from the Open the Book that we do and tell the story from the Bible. I want you to think for a moment. It's hard, isn't it, to always do the right thing. Sometimes it's much easier to do the wrong thing. Sometimes it's easier to be mean than to be kind. Sometimes, instead of being friendly, we can be very rude or bad-tempered. And sometimes we're afraid to stand up against people who are bullies. Well, our story today is about a man who chose to do the right thing. His name was Daniel. He was far from his home because he'd been taken to a country called Babylon as a prisoner, and he was made to work for the king. But Daniel never forgot his homeland, and each day he would go to the window in his room and face towards Jerusalem, the capital city of his home, and pray to God. Daniel did very well as the king's servant, and along with others he was put in charge with 120 people who governed the empire for the king. But Daniel soon showed that he worked a lot better than the other officials, and so the king decided to put him in charge and make him the boss. Well, as you can imagine, the other governors were very jealous of Daniel, and they tried to find something wrong with the way he ruled the empire. But they couldn't, because Daniel was so honest and reliable. The king really could trust him. Well, they said to each other, there's nothing we can accuse Daniel of doing unless it's something to do with the God he worships. So they thought of a plot to get Daniel into trouble. They went to the king and they said, we want you to make a new law. And that law should be for 30 days that no one is allowed to pray to any god except you. Anyone who breaks this law, Your Majesty, should be thrown into the pit of lions. And in this way they flattered the king and they tricked him into signing this new law. And once King Darius, that was his name, had signed that law, it could never be changed. Well, Daniel heard about this new law, but he said to himself, I love God, and I will still pray to him, even though it is forbidden. And he went to his home, and he went to his usual place in an upstairs room. He knelt down at the open window and prayed to God. Of course, Daniel's enemies were watching, and they went straight to the king. Your Majesty, they said, Daniel doesn't obey the order you signed. He prays to his God 3 times a day. He must be thrown into the pit of lions. When the king heard this, he was horrified, very upset and sad. He knew he'd been tricked. He had no option but to obey the law that he'd made. And so very reluctantly he gave orders that Daniel should be thrown into the pit of lions. But he said to Daniel, "May your God rescue you." A stone was put over the mouth of the pit, and the king's royal seal was put on it so that nobody could rescue Daniel. And then King Darius went back to his palace, but he couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned and wondered what was happening to Daniel. And when the morning came, he got up and hurried to the pit, and he called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God," he cried out, "was your God able to save you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "Your Majesty, God sent his angel to shut the mouths of the lions so that they could not hurt me. God knew that I had done nothing wrong." The king was overjoyed that Daniel was alive, and he gave orders that he should be pulled out of the pit. But this had made King Darius think, and he wrote to all the people in his empire with a new law. "I command that everyone should fear and respect Daniel's God. His rule will be forever, and his kingdom will never be destroyed, and his power will never come to an end. He is the God who rescues and performs miracles. He saved Daniel from being killed by the lions." As we think about that story from the Bible, we see that Daniel knew that it was wrong to treat the king as though he was a god and pray to him. And even though he knew he was risking being put in the pit of the lions, he chose to do what he knew to be right. He honoured and respected God, and God kept him safe. But Daniel was very brave, wasn't he? And doing the right thing can often be difficult for us too. Can you remember a time when you chose to do the right thing instead of the wrong? Perhaps you can remember a time when you stood up for someone who was being bullied by others. If you did stand up for somebody, then you were very like Daniel, who chose to do the right thing, even though he had to be very brave. I'm going to say a prayer, and if you want to make this prayer your prayer, you can say Amen. Dear God, sometimes other people try to make us do the wrong thing. Help us to be brave and stand up for what we know is right, just as Daniel did. Amen. Well, goodbye, and I'll see you another time.